The morning of March 15th, 2025, in Homestead was typical for this time of year, damp and warm, with a light haze rising from the asphalt. Maurice Coleman woke up at 5:30 a.m., as usual, without waiting for his alarm clock. The house at 247 Palm Street, where the Coleman family had lived for the past 12 years, was filled with the usual morning silence. Louise was still asleep when Maurice quietly went down to the kitchen to make coffee. The 43-year-old man looked tired. The wrinkles around his eyes had become more noticeable in recent months, and the gray hair at his temples was becoming more apparent. He mechanically turned on the local news, but kept the volume low so as not to wake his wife. Coleman Construction, a small construction company that Maurice had founded 7 years ago, was going through tough times. The economic downturn following the pandemic had hit the construction industry in Florida particularly hard, and small firms like Maurice's were especially vulnerable. Large Miami developers were snapping up contracts by offering rock-bottom prices, and local residents were increasingly postponing renovations and construction projects indefinitely. Louise appeared in the kitchen around 7 in the morning, already dressed for work in a strict navy blue suit. At 39, she had retained her attractiveness, although constant stress had left its mark. Her gaze had become more intense, and her smile no longer seemed as natural as it used to be. "Up early again?" she asked, pouring herself coffee from the pot that was already ready. "I have a lot to do today. I have a meeting with the contractors for the Kendall Avenue project," replied Maurice, without looking up from his phone, where he was checking his work email. Louise nodded, but something in his tone alarmed her. In 18 years of marriage, she had learned to read the slightest changes in her husband's mood, and something had definitely changed in recent months. Maurice had become more withdrawn, often staying late at work, and their conversations increasingly revolved around household issues and financial problems. Homestead was a town where everyone knew each other, at least in middle-class circles. Louise had been working as an accountant at Sunshine Realty for 8 years, and clients often became acquaintances, and acquaintances became friends. It was both the advantage and the curse of a small town, the support of the community in difficult times, but also the inability to hide family problems. "Jessica called last night," Louise said, spreading jam on her toast. "She's inviting us to dinner on Saturday. She says she has a new lasagna recipe she wants to try." Jessica Stone had been Louise's best friend since she moved to Homestead after her wedding. The owner of a small cafe called Morning Glory on Main Street, she was the person Louise could turn to with any problem. Jessica had never married, devoting herself entirely to her business, but she had an amazing ability to give wise advice on family matters. "Sure, let's go," Maurice replied absently, still focused on his phone. Louise felt a familiar pang of irritation. Maurice used to be enthusiastic about meeting friends, planning weekends, and suggesting places to go. Now he seemed to be present only physically, his thoughts somewhere far away. At Sunshine Realty, Louise's workday began with reviewing new applications and reconciling accounts. The office was located in a small building in the city center, with windows overlooking the main street, where morning traffic moved slowly. Colleagues greeted each other, exchanged news about their families and plans for the weekend. "Louise, do you have a minute?" Maria Vasquez, the office secretary, asked her. "My cousin is looking for a contractor to renovate her bathroom. Maybe Maurice would be interested?" This was common practice in Homestead. People recommended each other, helped each other with work, creating an informal network of mutual support. Louise wrote down the contact information and promised to pass it on to her husband. Small jobs like this helped Coleman Construction stay afloat during tough times. Around noon, Louise decided to stop by Jessica's cafe for lunch. Morning Glory was a place where locals often met to discuss the news and share gossip. Jessica, as always, was happy to see her friend and immediately poured her a cup of coffee without being asked. "How are things at home?" Jessica asked, sitting down at a table next to Louise. After the lunch rush, the cafe was almost empty, and she could afford to take a short break. "Everything's fine," Louise replied automatically. but Jessica knew her too well to believe this formal phrase. "Lou, I can see that something's wrong. You've been looking tense for the last few weeks." Louise paused, stirring sugar into her coffee. She wasn't ready to voice her suspicions aloud. That would make them too real. "Maurice is working a lot. We don't spend much time together. I guess I'm just tired of the routine," she finally said. Jessica nodded understandingly. She had seen many couples in her cafe, watching their relationships change over time, passion giving way to habit and sometimes indifference. Meanwhile, at the Coleman construction office on the outskirts of town, Maurice was meeting with Emily Chen, a sales manager he had hired a year and a half ago. Emily was a smart, ambitious 28-year-old who had recently earned her MBA from the University of Miami. She brought fresh ideas to the small company about promoting services and working with clients. "The Kendall Avenue project could be a breakthrough for us," Emily said, as she showed Maurice a presentation on her laptop. "If we do a good job and meet the deadline, the client has promised to recommend us to his friends in the Coral Gables area." Maurice listened attentively. Emily had the energy and optimism that he himself was beginning to lack. In her presence, he felt a surge of strength, a desire to fight for the future of the company, not just survive from day to day. "Great work, Emily. This contract really could turn things around for us," he said, and their eyes met for a moment longer than the work situation required. Maurice returned home around 8 that evening. Louise had already eaten dinner and was watching the news in the living room. The house on Palm Street was modest but cozy. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard where Louise had planted a flower bed with local plants. It had been their dream home when they bought it, a symbol of their success and stability. "How's work?" Louise asked as Maurice sat down next to her on the sofa. "Not bad. Emily found us a potentially big order," he replied, and Louise noticed how his tone changed when he mentioned his colleague's name. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The screen showed a story about rising real estate prices in South Florida, which paradoxically did not lead to an increase in orders for local construction companies. Most projects went to large corporations. "Maybe we could go somewhere for the weekend?" Louise suggested unexpectedly. "To Key Largo or even Miami. We haven't just been together like that in a long time." Maurice hesitated for a second. "I have a meeting on Saturday morning. Maybe next weekend." It was a lie, and something in her husband's tone told Louise that he wasn't telling the truth. But she said nothing, not ready for a confrontation. Late at night, when Maurice was already asleep, Louise lay awake for a long time, listening to his breathing. 18 years ago, they had vowed to be together in joy and sorrow, in wealth and poverty. At the time, it seemed that love would overcome all obstacles. But life turned out to be more complicated than the vows they had exchanged at St. Patrick's Church in Hamburg in front of family and friends. Louise tried to remember when exactly something had changed between them. Perhaps it was gradual, fatigue, routine, financial problems slowly wearing away at their relationship, like water wearing away stone. Or maybe there was a specific moment that she had missed, not noticed, because she was too busy with work and everyday concerns. Outside the window, palm trees rustled in the warm Florida breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a few cars drove by. Homestead slept, unaware that in one of the houses on Palm Street, a tragedy was beginning to unfold that would shake the entire city. 3 weeks after that restless, sleepless night, Louise realized that her fears were well-founded. On April 5th, another Friday, Maurice stayed late at work again, until 9:30 in the evening. It had become a pattern: late meetings, urgent projects, sudden commitments. Coleman Construction was indeed going through difficult times. Maurice was not exaggerating when he spoke of financial problems. Over the past 3 months, the company had lost 2 major contracts. One went to a cheaper firm in Miami, and the other was canceled because the customer decided to postpone construction indefinitely. The staff was down to just 5 people, compared to 10 a year earlier, and every month Maurice anxiously checked the bank accounts. Emily Chen was the only bright spot in this bleak picture. When Maurice hired her a year and a half ago, many in town were surprised. Why would a small construction company need a sales manager with an MBA? But Emily quickly proved her worth. She reorganized the customer service system, created a professional website, established relationships with material suppliers, and even helped secure several government contracts for city improvements. At 28, Emily looked like the epitome of a modern businesswoman. A business school graduate, she could have easily found a job at any major company in Miami, but she chose to stay in Homestead. "I like the small-town atmosphere," she explained to her colleagues. "Here, you can really make a difference." In reality, the reason was more personal. Emily grew up in a family of immigrants from Taiwan in a crowded neighborhood in Queens, New York. Her father worked as a cook in a Chinese restaurant, and her mother cleaned offices at night. They invested all their savings in their only daughter's education, dreaming that she would build a career in big business. But Emily was tired of the endless competition and pressure of the big city. Homestead offered her the opportunity to be a big fish in a small pond. "Maurice, we have a problem with the Kendall Avenue project," Emily said as she entered his office in the afternoon of April 5th. "The brick supplier has raised prices by 30%. If we accept these terms, our profit will almost disappear." Maurice rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar headache coming on. Every project lately had turned into a minefield. Either material prices, delivery delays, or additional customer requirements. "Are there any alternative suppliers?" he asked. "Two options. One in Fort Lauderdale, 15% cheaper, but the quality is questionable. The second is in Miami itself. Good materials, but delivery will be expensive." Emily sat down across from his desk, opened her laptop, and began showing him the calculations. Maurice noticed how neatly she had styled her hair, how professional she looked in her strict gray suit. Unlike many locals, Emily never looked relaxed or careless. She was always composed, focused on the goal. "What do you recommend?" Maurice asked, realizing that he really valued her opinion. In a year and a half of working together, Emily had never given him bad advice. "Go to Miami, meet with the supplier in person, try to negotiate a discount. Sometimes face-to-face meetings work better than phone calls," she replied. "I can go with you if you want. I have contacts in the Miami construction industry." Maurice nodded. It was a reasonable idea, although the trip meant another late day and another excuse to make up to Louise. Meanwhile, Louise was spending the evening at Jessica's, helping her friend close up the cafe. Morning Glory was open until 9 p.m. on Fridays, serving customers who came to have dinner after work or meet up with friends. "Is he late again?" Jessica asked, wiping down the last tables. "Third time this week," Louise replied, stacking chairs. "He says business is bad and he needs to work harder to keep the company afloat." "Do you believe him?" Louise froze with the rag in her hands. Jessica's question sounded too direct, but that was exactly what she had been thinking for the past few weeks. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Before, when he had problems at work, he would tell me all the details. We discussed every project, every problem. Now he just says a lot of work and nothing else." Jessica sat down at the bar, gesturing for Louise to do the same. The cafe was cozy and dimly lit, with only a few lamps illuminating the space. "Louise, I don't want to pry into your family affairs, but have you noticed anything else strange about his behavior?" Louise thought for a moment. Maurice had indeed changed. He had become more attentive to his appearance, bought new shirts, and started using cologne, which he had previously only worn on special occasions. He started checking his phone more often and sometimes replied to messages, even when they were having dinner. "Maybe," she replied cautiously. "But maybe I'm just being paranoid?" "Maybe not," Jessica said softly. "A woman's intuition is rarely wrong." On Monday, April 8th, Maurice and Emily traveled to Miami to meet with a building materials supplier. Florida Building Supplies was located in an industrial area near the port, in a huge warehouse complex where trucks were loaded with bricks, cement, and other materials. The negotiations went better than expected. The owner of the company, an elderly Cuban named Rafael Martinez, turned out to be an old-school man who valued personal relationships over formal contracts. He agreed to give a 12% discount on condition of cash payment and self-delivery of materials. "Great job," Maurice said to Emily as they walked to the car. "I could never have gotten those terms without you." "You just have to know how to talk to people," Emily smiled. "Martinez is old school. Trust is more important to him than profit." It was already 6 in the evening, and traffic in Miami had turned into a nightmare. Maurice suggested waiting an hour or two at a restaurant before driving back to Homestead. They found a small Cuban restaurant in Little Havana. Versailles was a popular spot among locals, serving authentic food and playing traditional music. At a table by the window, they ordered roast pork with rice and black beans, washing it down with local beer. "Tell me about yourself," Maurice asked when the food arrived. "I know your resume, but I don't know what brought you to Homestead." Emily talked about her childhood in New York, her immigrant parents, and her years at university. She was candid but didn't complain. She simply explained her choice to live in a small town where she could build something meaningful. "What about you?" she asked. "Have you always dreamed of owning your own business?" Maurice talked about his years working for large construction companies, his dream of creating something of his own, how he met Louise, and how they planned their future together. But when talking about his wife, he noted that lately these plans had become increasingly vague. They returned to Homestead around 10 o'clock in the evening. Maurice drove Emily home, a small apartment in a new complex on the outskirts of town. As they said goodbye, their hands accidentally touched when Emily handed him the documents from the negotiations. "Thanks for today," she said. "I haven't had such a good time in a long time." "Me neither," Maurice replied, realizing that it was true. At home, Louise was already asleep, leaving dinner in the refrigerator and a note on the kitchen table. "I made arrangements with Jessica for dinner on Saturday. I hope you can come." Maurice ate a cold sandwich while standing at the kitchen window and looking out at the dark street. He thought about his conversation with Emily, how easy it was for them to communicate, how she understood his business problems. He hadn't spoken so openly with Louise in a long time. Their conversations were limited to everyday issues and financial problems. The next day at the office, Emily brought coffee and a report on yesterday's negotiations. She was professional as always, but there was a new tension between them, pleasant and unsettling at the same time. "I have another idea," she said, sitting down across from his desk. "One of my acquaintances in Miami is looking for partners for a major renovation project, a residential complex in Aventura. If we can get this contract, we can solve all our financial problems." Maurice was intrigued. Aventura was a prestigious area between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, where expensive condominiums were being built for wealthy buyers. "But there's a catch," Emily continued. "You'll have to travel to Miami often for meetings, sometimes staying overnight if negotiations drag on. Are you ready for that kind of work schedule?" Maurice nodded without hesitation. The opportunity to take the company to the next level was worth any sacrifice. On Saturday evening, the Coleman family came to Jessica's for dinner. Maurice seemed distracted, checking his phone several times to respond to messages. "Sorry, work stuff," he apologized to Jessica. "On a Saturday night?" the hostess asked in surprise. "Business never takes a day off," Maurice replied, and Louise noticed a false note in his voice. After dinner, as they walked home, Louise decided to ask a direct question. "Maurice, who have you been texting all evening?" "Emily. She found us a potentially big project in Miami. We were discussing the details." "On Saturday night?" "Lou, I explained that if we want to save the company, we need to work harder." But there was an irritation in his tone that hadn't been there before. Louise felt that something had finally broken between them. On Sunday morning, when Maurice left for the gym, Louise did something she had never done before in 18 years of marriage. She checked his phone. Most of the messages were work-related, but several exchanges with Emily went beyond a purely business relationship. "Thanks for last night. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed work so much," Emily wrote late Friday night. "Me too. You make even the hard days enjoyable," Maurice replied. Louise felt a chill inside. Formally, there was nothing compromising in the messages, but the tone, the subtext, the time they were sent. Everything pointed to the fact that there was more than just a working relationship between her husband and his employee. When Maurice returned from the gym, Louise had already decided not to make a scene. So far, she had no direct evidence, only suspicions and female intuition. But she would watch, gather facts, and prepare for the worst-case scenario. That same Sunday evening, Emily called Maurice. "Maurice, sorry to bother you on your day off. My friend from Miami is ready to meet tomorrow morning. This could be our chance." "Of course, we'll go," he replied, not noticing the change in his wife's face. Louise realized that tomorrow, a new chapter in their family history would begin, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what she might learn. Monday, April 15th, began for Louise with a discovery that changed her whole life. In the morning, while gathering Maurice's clothes for laundry, she found a check from the Ocean Drive Bistro restaurant in Miami Beach in his jacket pocket. The date was last Friday. The time was 8:30 p.m. The bill for two was $180. Maurice had left that day for a supposed business meeting with suppliers and returned home around midnight, citing traffic. But Ocean Drive Bistro was an expensive, romantic restaurant where couples went on dates, not business partners for negotiations. Louise sat on the edge of the bed, holding the check with trembling hands. 18 years of marriage, thousands of small proofs of trust and love, and all of it was crumbling from a single piece of paper worth $180. That same day after work, she stopped by Jessica's at Morning Glory. The cafe was already closing. The last customers were finishing their coffee and getting ready to leave. "Lou, you look terrible," Jessica said when she saw her friend. "What happened?" Louise silently handed her the check. Jessica studied it carefully, and her face became serious. Maybe it really was a business meeting. At a romantic restaurant on Ocean Drive for $180 for two? Louise laughed bitterly. "Jess, I'm not stupid. I know what's going on. What are you going to do?" "Talk to him. Hear the truth." But Louise learned the truth sooner than she planned. That evening, while Maurice was in the shower, his phone vibrated with an incoming message. Louise saw the sender's name, Emily, and, without hesitation, opened the conversation. What she read exceeded her worst fears. The messages from the last 2 weeks were full of intimacy and tenderness that had been missing from their own marriage for several years. "I can't wait for our weekend," Emily wrote. "Fontainebleau is booked for Friday and Saturday. It will be unforgettable." "I'm dreaming about it too," Maurice replied. "Finally, we can really be together." "I love you," Emily wrote in her last message, sent half an hour ago. "I love you too," was Maurice's reply. Louise felt the room begin to spin. Fontainebleau was one of the most expensive hotels in Miami Beach. She and Maurice could never afford to stay there, even in their best years. And now he was booking a room for a romantic weekend with another woman. The sound of the shower turning off made her quickly put the phone down and leave the bedroom. She was standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, when Maurice came downstairs in his bathrobe. "Something wrong?" he asked, noticing her state. "Maurice, we need to talk." Something in her tone made him stop and listen. "About what?" "About your relationship with Emily." A few seconds of silence hung in the air like an executioner's axe before the blow. "Lou, I don't understand what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me!" Louise exploded. "I saw the restaurant check. I read your messages. Fontainebleau? Seriously? You're booking romantic getaways with her while I'm here working and trying to save our home?" Maurice paled. He realized there was no point in denying it. "Louise, It's not what you think. Then what is it, Maurice? A business meeting? Team building? Or are you going to tell me you're in love? Maurice remained silent, and his silence spoke louder than any words. My God, whispered Louise. You really fell in love with her. Lou, please, let me explain. 18 years, Maurice! I've been there for you for 18 years. When you started your business, when we had no money, when your mother was sick, I supported you in everything. And you traded that for a girl 10 years younger than me? It's not that simple, Morris tried to argue. Then explain. Explain how this happened. When did you decide you didn't need me anymore? Maurice sat down at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. I didn't plan it, Lou. It's just different with Emily. She understands my problems, supports my ideas. I feel alive when I'm with her. And dead when you're with me? Louise's voice trembled with pain. No, it's not like that. It's just that you and I have become like roommates. Work, home, bills, sleep. Where is the passion that used to be between us? Passion? Are you talking about passion? Louise laughed bitterly. Maurice, passion fades, but love remains. Loyalty, fidelity, what we swore to each other. I know, but no buts. Either you end it with her and try to save our marriage, or you leave, right now. Maurice raised his head and looked at his wife. She saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke it aloud. Lou, I need time to think. Time to think? She asked with growing anger. You already thought when you booked the hotel. You already decided when you wrote I love you to her. Louise, please. Get out, she said quietly. What? Get out of my house, right now. Lou, don't be like that. Get out! She shouted so loudly that the neighbors must have heard. Maurice realized it was useless to argue. He got up and headed for the stairs. I'll pack my things. Only the essentials, said Louise. You can take the rest later. Half an hour later, Maurice left the house with a bag in his hands. He turned around at the door. Lou, I didn't want it to turn out this way. But it did, she replied without looking at him. Now live with it. The door closed, and for the first time in 18 years, Louise was left alone in the house. The next day, the whole of Homestead knew about the Colemans' breakup. In a small town, news like this spreads faster than wildfire. Neighbors gave Louise sympathetic looks, and colleagues cautiously asked how she was feeling. You're doing great, said Maria Vasquez at the Sunshine Realty office. If I were you, I would have already made a scene in front of the whole street. But Louise didn't feel great. She felt devastated, betrayed, humiliated. Every glance from her neighbors seemed full of pity, or worse, schadenfreude. On Wednesday, she learned details from Jessica that finished her off. They're renting an apartment together, her friend said, in that new complex on Main Street. Jack Thompson saw them moving in together. Jack Thompson worked for a property management company and knew about every apartment rental in town. So he's not coming back, Louise said quietly. It looks that way. On Friday morning, Louise followed Maurice and Emily. They loaded their suitcases into the car and drove toward the highway leading to Miami. Louise had no doubt that they were heading to Fontainebleau for that romantic weekend. She returned home and cried for the first time in a week. Not the quiet tears of self-pity she shed every night, but the loud, painful sobs of a woman whose life had fallen apart. By Sunday, her condition had worsened. She couldn't eat, hardly slept, constantly replaying the last few months in her head, trying to understand where she had missed the moment. When did Maurice start to drift away? When did Emily appear in his heart? What had she, Louise, done wrong? Jessica came every day, tried to get her friend to eat, persuaded her to see a psychologist. Lou, you can't destroy yourself like this. He's not worth it. 18 years of my life, Jess. Half my life. I thought we would grow old together. We planned where we would go when we retired, how we would babysit our grandchildren. You're still young and beautiful. You have your whole life ahead of you. What life? Everyone in Homestead knows that my husband left me for a younger lover. How am I supposed to live with that shame? On Monday, Louise didn't go to work, citing illness. Neither did she on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Jessica came to her house and was shocked by what she saw. Louise had lost several pounds, had dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was a mess. The house was a mess. Unwashed dishes, dirty laundry, closed curtains. "Louise, what's going on with you?" "Nothing," she replied indifferently. "Just trying to figure out how to move on." "No, that's not it. Definitely not." Jessica force-fed her friend, made her take a shower, and tidied up the house. "Lou, you have to pull yourself together. Otherwise, he'll have won not only your heart, but your life." "Maybe he already has," whispered Louise. On Thursday evening, Louise received a message from Morris. "I need to pick up the rest of my things. I'll come tomorrow morning." She didn't reply. On Friday morning, Morris arrived with Emily. They looked happy, tanned, in love. Louise watched from her bedroom window as they entered the house, Emily laughing at something Maurice said. 20 minutes later, they came out with boxes and bags. Maurice looked up at the bedroom window where Louise was standing, but she stepped back into the shadows. When they left, Louise felt something new. Not pain, not self-pity, something cold and hard that settled in her chest like a stone. She opened her laptop and typed into the search bar, Fontainebleau, Miami Beach. The hotel's website had photos of luxurious rooms, restaurants, and the beach. In the events section, she saw an announcement, Romantic Weekend for Couples in Love, April 27th to 28th, special offers and surprises. April 27th was next Friday. Louise closed her laptop and looked at her reflection in the dark screen. The woman staring back at her was not the Louise Coleman who had taken her vows at St. Patrick's Church 18 years ago. This woman was capable of things the old Louise would never have dared to do. Friday, April 27th, 2025, 6:30 a.m. Louise Coleman sat in her Honda Accord in the parking lot of a gas station 20 miles from Homestead and watched Maurice's silver pickup truck drive by toward Miami. She could make out two figures in the car, Maurice at the wheel and Emily in the passenger seat. Louise waited a minute, then started the engine and followed them, keeping a few cars' length behind. Over the past 2 weeks, she had studied their routine, knowing what time they left for work, where they bought groceries, and which gym Maurice went to. Surveillance had become her new obsession. In the trunk of her car was a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber pistol that had belonged to her late father. Robert Hartman was a Vietnam veteran who had kept a gun in the house his whole life to protect his family. After his death 5 years ago, the pistol had been passed on to Louise along with other family belongings. She never thought she would ever use it. Last night, she took the gun out of the safe in her bedroom, cleaned it, and loaded it, following the instructions she remembered from her childhood. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 16, saying that every woman should be able to defend herself. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to choose between your life and someone else's, you know what to do, he said at the time. Louise had no intention of killing anyone. At least, that's what she told herself. She just wanted to see them together, to finally confirm the reality of the betrayal. Maybe talk to them, say everything that had built up over those agonizing weeks. The drive to Miami took an hour and a half. Maurice's pickup truck turned into the Fontainebleau Hotel around 9 in the morning. Louise parked on a nearby street and watched as they unloaded their suitcases from the car. Emily was wearing a white summer dress. Morris was in casual jeans and a polo shirt. They looked like a happy couple heading off for a romantic weekend. The Fontainebleau Miami Beach rose above the ocean like a white ship from another world. It was a luxury hotel where celebrities and millionaires stayed, where a single night's room rate cost more than Louise earned in a week. Maurice had never taken her to places like this. Even on their honeymoon, they had stayed in a modest motel in Key West. Louise spent 4 hours in the car, studying the hotel grounds, watching the staff and guests. Around noon, she entered the lobby, saying she was considering the hotel for her niece's wedding. The girl at the reception desk gave her brochures and a floor plan. "Which floor would you recommend for a wedding ceremony?" Louise asked. "The 10th floor is very popular. It has panoramic windows overlooking the ocean and spacious suites," replied the employee. Louise nodded, mentally noting the information. When she registered Maurice on Booking.com using his forgotten password, she saw that a suite on the 10th floor had been booked. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Louise returned to the hotel. This time she was dressed more formally. A dark suit, a business bag, her hair neatly styled. She looked like a businesswoman arriving for a meeting. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the 10th floor. The corridor was empty, only the quiet hum of air conditioners breaking the silence. The rooms were located on both sides of a long corridor covered with expensive carpet. 1024. Maurice and Emily's room. Louise stopped at the door and listened. Muffled voices and laughter came from behind the door. They were there, enjoying their romantic weekend, while she was falling apart from pain and humiliation. Louise returned to the car and took the gun out of the trunk. The weapon was heavier than she remembered. She put it in her purse and headed back to the hotel. At 4:47 p.m., Louise knocked on the door of room 1024. "Who's there?" Maurice's voice came from inside. "Room service," Louise replied, changing her voice. The door opened. Maurice stood in a hotel bathrobe, his hair tousled, clearly having just taken a shower. When he saw his wife, he turned pale. "Louise? What are you doing here? May I come in? Or would you prefer the entire hallway to hear our conversation?" Maurice hesitated and stepped back. Louise entered the room and closed the door behind her. Emily was sitting on the bed in a silk negligee, drying her hair with a hairdryer. Seeing Louise, she turned off the hairdryer and slowly stood up. "Mrs. Coleman," she said quietly. "Miss Chen," Louise replied coldly. The room was luxurious, a huge bed, panoramic windows overlooking the ocean, a marble bathroom. There was a bottle of champagne on the table, and rose petals were scattered across the bed. "Lou, how did you find us?" Maurice asked. "It wasn't difficult. You weren't exactly hiding." Emily slowly walked over to the dressing table where her phone was lying. "Don't move," Louise said sharply. "Lou, listen." "No, you listen to me," Louise interrupted. 18 years, Maurice. For 18 years, I was the perfect wife. I supported your dreams, believed in you when everyone else doubted you. And you threw that away for whom?" She turned to Emily. "For a career woman who sees you as a stepping stone to success?" "That's not true," Emily interjected. "I love Maurice." "You love him?" Louise laughed sarcastically. "What do you know about love? That he snores at night? That he's afraid of spiders? That the first thing he does every morning is check his bank account because he's afraid of going bankrupt?" "Lou, stop it." Maurice tried to stop her. "No, I won't stop. You destroyed our family for an affair with a girl 15 years younger than you. Do you think she'll stay with you when the money runs out? When you get more wrinkles?" Louise took a gun out of her purse. Maurice and Emily froze. "Lou, put that away," Maurice said, trying to sound calm. "Let's talk like adults." "Grown-ups don't destroy 18-year marriages for the sake of passion," Louise replied. Her hand was shaking, but her finger was on the trigger. "Please," Emily whispered. "I didn't mean for it to turn out this way." "But it did," said Louise. "And now you're both going to pay for it." The first shot rang out at 5:23 p.m. The second followed a few seconds later. Jose Ramirez, a hotel bellhop, heard the shots, but at first thought they were balloons popping or sounds from the television. Only when he saw a woman running out of room 1024 did he realize that something serious had happened. The woman was of medium height, wearing a dark suit with her hair neatly styled. She walked quickly down the hallway toward the stairs, not running, not panicking. Jose remembered that she was carrying a black handbag and looked very pale. At 5:35 p.m., Hotel manager Carlos Vasquez received a call from a maid and immediately called the police. The first patrol arrived 8 minutes later. Detective Mark Rodriguez of the Miami-Dade Police Department received the call at 6:15 p.m. A 45-year-old veteran with 20 years of experience, he had seen many murders, but cases in expensive hotels always attracted increased attention from the press and his superiors. Room 1024 was cordoned off with yellow tape. Technicians had already begun working with the evidence, photographing the crime scene from different angles. Maurice Coleman was lying by the bathroom door wearing a hotel bathrobe. He had a gunshot wound to the chest and died instantly. Emily Chen was found near the bed dressed in a silk peignoir. She had a head wound, also fatal. "What do we have?" Rodriguez asked Sergeant Martinez. "Double homicide, estimated time of death around 5:30. A witness saw the suspect leaving the room. Middle-aged woman, dark suit." Rodriguez examined the room. No signs of a struggle, nothing stolen. Champagne on the table, rose petals on the bed. Clearly a romantic rendezvous. Victim's documents? "Here." Martinez handed him 2 driver's licenses. Maurice Coleman, 43, Homestead, Florida. Emily Chen, 28, same address. "A couple?" "Looks like it. Checked in for 2 days." Rodriguez studied the driver's licenses. Something struck him as odd. "Coleman has a different address on his license," he noted. 247 Palm Street. And the girl has 156 Main Street, but both are in Homestead. Maybe they moved recently. Possibly. We need to check their connection, find out the motive. Rodriguez walked over to the window. 10th floor, beautiful ocean view, expensive room, romantic setting, but something didn't add up. Someone is very angry with this couple, he muttered to himself. Hotel manager Carlos Vasquez gave detailed testimony. The couple checked in that morning, looked happy, ordered champagne to their room, and planned to have dinner at the hotel restaurant. "Has anyone asked about them? Maybe a middle-aged woman?" Rodriguez inquired. "This afternoon, a lady was interested in our wedding services, but that's normal." "Describe her." "Around 40, dark hair, business suit, polite, calm." Rodriguez wrote down the description. Too many coincidences to be a coincidence. By 7 o'clock in the evening, technicians had found 2 .38 caliber bullet casings. There were no fingerprints on them, indicating the use of gloves or careful preparation. "Professional job?" Martinez asked. "I don't think so," Rodriguez replied. "Professionals don't leave casings behind. This is the work of an amateur, but a well-prepared one." The hotel's CCTV system provided a partial picture. Cameras in the lobby recorded a woman entering the hotel at 3:20 p.m. and again at 4:40 p.m. Her face was partially hidden by sunglasses and a large bag. She was scouting the area, Rodriguez concluded. First reconnaissance, then execution. Footage from the emergency stairwell camera shows the same woman descending from the 10th floor at 5:25 p.m. She is not panicking, not running, just walking quickly. "Cold as ice," Martinez commented. "Or in shock," Rodriguez replied. "We need to go to Homestead, find out who these people are and who could have killed them." At 8:30 p.m., Rodriguez called the Homestead police station. The officer on duty, Jim Connor, confirmed that he knew Maurice Coleman. "He's the owner of a construction company, a respectable man. What happened?" "He was killed today in Miami, along with a young woman named Emily Chen." A few seconds of silence. "Emily Chen worked for him as a sales manager," Connor finally said. "Does his wife Louise know?" "His wife?" Rodriguez perked up. "Tell me about her." "Louise Coleman. She works as an accountant. The couple had been married for 18 years, but lately there had been rumors in town that they were having problems in their marriage." "What kind of problems?" "Maurice left his wife a few weeks ago. He's living with this Emily Chen. The whole town is talking about it." Rodriguez felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. "Officer Connor, I need you to find Louise Coleman. and bring her to the station for questioning, as soon as possible. Do you think she's... I think we have something to talk about with the widow. Saturday, April 28th, 6:45 a.m. Detective Rodriguez and Sergeant Martinez pulled up to the house at 247 Palm Street in Homestead. A 2019 Honda Accord was parked in the driveway, the same car registered to Louise Coleman. Officer Jim Connor from the local police met them at the house. She's home, the lights were on all night. Neighbors say they saw her come back around 9 last night. Rodriguez nodded. The timing was right. If Louise left the hotel around 5:30 p.m., she could have made it to Homestead by 9 in the evening. The door opened after the third ring. Louise Coleman looked as if she hadn't slept all night. Dark circles under her eyes, disheveled hair, trembling hands. She was still wearing the same dark suit that the hotel cameras had captured. "Mrs. Coleman?" "Detective Rodriguez, Miami-Dade Police. We need to talk to you." Louise nodded slowly, retreating into the house. "I know why you're here." The living room was a mess. Scattered papers, photographs, an overturned wine glass on the coffee table. On the sofa lay a black handbag, the same one Louisa had been carrying in the video recordings. "Mrs. Coleman, are you aware of what happened yesterday at the Fontainebleau Hotel?" "Yes," she replied quietly. "Where were you yesterday between 5 and 6 in the evening?" Louise looked at him for a long time. "In room 1024. Rodriguez felt relieved. He had expected long interrogations, denials, alibis. But Louise Coleman was not going to lie. "Mrs. Coleman, I must inform you of your rights." "I killed them," Louise interrupted. "Morris and that girl. I shot them both." Silence hung in the room. Martinez turned on the tape recorder. "Where is the weapon, Mrs. Coleman?" Louise pointed to the fireplace. "In the chimney. My father's gun. A Smith & Wesson .38. Connor walked over to the fireplace and a minute later pulled out a gun wrapped in a towel. "Is this it?" Louise nodded. "Mrs. Coleman, do you understand the seriousness of your words? You are confessing to double first-degree murder." "I understand," she replied with unexpected calm. "Do you want to know why?" For the next 2 hours, Louise told her story. About 18 years of marriage, about how Maurice began to drift away, about Emily's appearance in their lives, about the restaurant check she found, the messages she read, the confrontation, and her husband leaving home. "I followed them," she confessed. "I knew they were going to Miami. I didn't plan to kill them. I just wanted to talk, to say everything I thought." "What changed?" Louise fell silent, remembering. "When I saw them in that room with rose petals and champagne. He never did romantic surprises like that for me. Even on our honeymoon, we stayed in a cheap motel. But for her, he booked a suite for $500 a night. And then you got the gun?" "That's when I realized they had destroyed my life for their own pleasure. Maurice threw away 18 years like trash, and she knew he was married, but she didn't care." At 9:30 in the morning, Louise was arrested on charges of double first-degree murder. The news of her arrest spread throughout Homestead within an hour. On Monday, Detective Rodriguez came to town to gather additional testimony. The first was Jessica Stone. "I saw her fall apart," said the cafe owner, wiping away tears. "Louise was the kindest person I knew, but what Maurice did to her broke her." "Did she talk about revenge?" "No, never. She just cried and asked what she had done wrong. She blamed herself, not them." "When was the last time you saw her?" "Thursday evening. She looked different. She wasn't crying or complaining. She just sat there staring at one spot. I asked her how she was doing, and she replied, 'It will all be over soon.'" Testimony from neighbors, colleagues, and acquaintances painted a picture of a woman driven to despair by her husband's betrayal. Maria Vasquez from the real estate agency said that Louisa had lost 10 kilograms in the last month, stopped taking care of herself, and often sat in the office with a vacant stare. "She was the perfect wife," said her elderly neighbor, Dorothy Henderson. She took care of the house and supported her husband through difficult times, and he left her for a young Asian woman. Rodriguez also interviewed employees of Coleman Construction. The picture that emerged from their testimony was painful. Maurice changed after he hired Emily, said electrician Tom Bradley. He started spending more time at the office and dressing better. We all knew what was going on, but no one talked about it openly. How did people feel about their relationship? Different ways. Some were jealous of Maurice, a beautiful young girl. Some felt sorry for his wife. Emily was a good worker, but she knew she was destroying someone's family. The trial began on June 15, 2025 in Miami-Dade County Court. Prosecutor Robert Sanchez sought the maximum penalty, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Louisa Coleman committed cold-blooded, premeditated murder, he said in his opening statement. She planned this crime, stalked her victims, armed herself, and shot 2 people in cold blood. Defense attorney Helen Martin stuck to a strategy of emotional appeal. "My client is the victim of a cruel betrayal," she told the jury. For 18 years, she was a faithful wife, supporting her husband in all his endeavors. And he broke her heart and destroyed her life for the sake of a fleeting passion. The courtroom was filled with residents of Homestead, journalists, and relatives of the victims. Emily Chen's parents flew in from New York, elderly immigrants who spoke broken English and couldn't understand how their successful daughter had become the victim of a family drama. On the second day of the trial, Jessica Stone testified as a witness. "Louisa was devastated," she said, looking at her friend. "She lost her appetite, her sleep, her ability to work. I tried to convince her to see a psychologist, but she refused." "Did she talk about plans for revenge?" asked the prosecutor. "Never. She blamed herself, thought she wasn't a good enough wife. But something changed? In the last days before the tragedy, she became different, cold, distant, as if she had made some kind of decision." On the third day, Louise testified on her own behalf. She talked about her years of marriage, the gradual cooling of her relationship with her husband, the pain of discovering his infidelity. "I didn't plan to kill them," she said in a quiet voice. "I just wanted to talk, to understand why it had turned out that way." "What changed your plans?" asked the lawyer. "When I saw them in that room, they were so happy. They were laughing and hugging each other, and I realized that I didn't exist for them. I was an obstacle that they had overcome. Maurice forgot about me the moment he saw her. And then you got the gun?" Then I thought, if I'm nothing to them, then they're nothing to me. If they can destroy my life without regret, then why should I regret their lives? Silence fell over the courtroom. "Do you regret what you did?" asked the lawyer. Louise was silent for a long time. "I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret that they will no longer hurt other wives." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict? Guilty of second-degree murder, without premeditation but with aggravating circumstances. Judge Margaret Rodriguez sentenced Louise Coleman to 25 years in prison with the right to parole after 15 years. "The court understands the pain the defendant has experienced," the judge said in her sentencing. "But no one has the right to take the law into their own hands. 2 people died because of a family conflict that could have been resolved in a civilized manner." As Louise was led away in handcuffs, Jessica Stone shouted from the courtroom, "I'll visit you. You're not alone." In Homestead, the verdict was met with mixed reactions. Some considered it fair, others too harsh for a woman driven to despair. Coleman Construction closed a month after the tragedy. The employees dispersed to other companies, and the office was sold to pay off debts. The house on Palm Street was put up for sale, but no buyers were found for over a year. Local residents avoided the house where the murderer lived. Detective Rodriguez closed the case, but it left him in a pensive mood. 3 lives destroyed because of infidelity, he told his colleagues. Maurice could have divorced civilly. Emily could have stayed away from a married man. Louise could have sought help, but each chose the worst possible path. The Coleman family's story became a cautionary tale for Homestead. In a small town where everyone knows each other, family dramas turn into public tragedies. But the lesson was a harsh one. Revenge may seem like justice in the moment of pain, but it never brings healing.